Dating games and romantic stories. Not a thing many tend to be into, and it's a weird topic to cover and think of. Dating games are a really niche genre that isn't truly seen in a wider audience unless it is either for gay purposes or used for a joke, such as that one Colonel Sanders dating game or something like Doki Doki Literature Club. OSTea is one of those romance visual novels and is, surprisingly, not cringe. What is OSTea, you may be pondering? Well, OSTea is a game all about a woman named Margaret and her misadventures with this tea she finds sitting on the floor of her favorite tea shop. After she goes home and drinks it, she turns into a mouse. Margaret then has to figure out how to turn back to a normal human being and then also solve all of her life problems along the way, like these stories tend to do. I originally went into this game thinking I could dunk on it for being cringe, but it surprisingly had endearing characters and grabbed my interest real quick. If you want my quick thoughts on the game overall, OSTea is an excellent, simple game. It succeeds with most of the idea it tosses in there, and no storyline is truly awful. The storylines are nice and fulfilling and can be really relatable, especially for those alphabetical LBGTQWIST people out there. The only true issues I had was with the pacing. It felt very fast a lot of the time, and it'd be like, oh yeah, they date now. With the romance plots, along with some of the certain plot points being too bizarre and fantastical for my own personal taste. Now, speaking of personal taste, we get to the true meat of the video. I want to rank every main storyline in OSTea from best to worst. All 4 storylines of the best friend Julie, Lynn, Sass boss Sylvia Drake, the totally not gay boss Felix Banks, and Gavin. Yeah, he's Gavin. This ranking will mainly try to be critical and analytical of the timelines in this game. Now, don't take everything I say super seriously, and everyone is subject to their own opinions, and so on. Spoilers ahead for the entirety of OSTea. I do recommend you buy this game and play it for yourself. I will leave their game in the description if you want to check it out. If you like this silly little video, go ahead and leave a little sub for ya boy. It is just one singular smack, and it helps out a ton. Okay, obligatory, important, boring, dumb, bugger info section over. Now let's get to that gaming. Now this ranking will go from best to worst, of course doing to number uno being more obvious. Number 1 all the way down to the dumpster bin garbage fire of number 4. This ranking will be based mainly off of my own opinion and perception of the game, along with my basic smooth brain knowledge of how stories should go and can be. Remember that you are as entitled to your own opinion as I am, and I personally am open to being talked about and being convinced about these things. Now, the number 1 best storyline of the entire game is obviously Julie's, hands down. Julie Lynn is just such an interesting and fun character, and the storyline of just essentially just be gay, do crime is awesome. It also manages to be rather silly, and at the same time have nice character moments. The story feels surprisingly real and down to earth about the struggle of a friendship between 2 friends with benefits and where this thing should go with them. Should they be a couple? Should they not? Is Julie a secret war criminal? Can you legally make a nuke inside your own home? And so on. Now, let me run down that story for you so you understand how the story is the comedy gold. The storyline starts right after you accidentally swap thermoses with Felix, and you can't call him because he left his phone sitting right at the desk too. How is he owning and running a business if he can't even hold on to anything for like a solid 5 seconds? After chasing him down for a while, you just decide, bump him, I'll talk to him tomorrow. Even though you know he has the funny animal transformation tea, and he's going to suffer if you let him go alone. So, you go back to your apartment, hoping to maybe research what this tea is, and you get a fat white woman jump scare. Julie has broken into your house and is ready to kill you. Just kidding. She actually just has been living out of her van and needed a place to stay for a while, and the two had an agreement to use each other's place in an emergency. Margaret and Julie banter for a bit until Julie's 500 IQ kicks in, and she notices Margaret got some whiskers on her face. Margaret then breaks it down that she's turning into a mouse, and there's a nice character moment between Julie hugging Margaret to calm her down. Then Julie suggests making some tea to calm down and talk about what could have caused this sudden mousening. Margaret then puts on the funny floor tea to steep. Soon after the two start having tea and slowly breaking down Margaret's day, Julie then starts quickly becoming a trash panda. The two swiftly understand that the tea is what causes, and Julie starts breaking down the Japanese that is on the box. In this Call of Duty campaign, the problem of how and why they become animals and how to turn back is quickly solved. However, that doesn't slow down the story in any way, and it keeps going with the characters and the good character development. Also good t-shirts with good pickle jokes. Like, what is this shirt? It's just an never stop gurking? What? This is just stupid little pickle. It's a pickle. It's just a pickle throwing it back. Once Julie realizes she can just disguise herself on command with his newfound animal powers, she has some devious new ideas. She drags Margaret along to an arcade to steal back a stuffed animal that was taken from her. You quickly get to see that Julie is truly a raccoon at heart. She knows the ins and outs of thievery. Now here is the worst thing I hate about the storyline. What is this stuffed animal, man? No, what is that? That is not real. The two obviously get caught for stealing from a claw machine and get in a high-speed ground chase. The two soon figure out that you can climb hecka well with your new animal form and chill and pound pizzas on a rooftop. The two go home, and the next day the two talk about the night previously and wonder what to do going forward. Margaret is kind of heartbroken that Julie keeps blueballing her and shutting down the idea of moving the friendship forward to maybe something more serious. Margaret quickly realizes she still has to give that bozo Felix his phone and thermos back to him, so she commutes back to work and finds her co-worker Sylvia with a suspiciously similar person in front of the store. A person named Portia, who forgot their name and who they are. Sylvia is helping them deal with being a woman and finding out who they truly are. This storyline, having an entire side storyline within it, shows you how much good effort and value there is within the storyline. This side story is also pretty funny, the hints they drop of who Portia is, and it's really funny on replay, knowing who they truly are. Anywho, Margaret gives Sylvia the keys to work, and just has Felix being missing now be Sylvia's problem and not her own. Margaret then heads back home to find Julie is suddenly a trash panda again. Now an even trashier and fuzzier panda. She quickly has a meltdown of anxiety and worry for Julie, telling her that she has been acting so impulsive and like she has been hiding something ever since they have gotten back to America. And then Julie starts snapping back and revealing that she did lose all of her money in France due to someone stealing and reselling her art. Essentially, just losing it all because of a pyramid scheme. Rare Julie L. Julie then comes up with a big, humongous plan to just steal back all her art since they have the new disguises of animals and super strength, somehow, of animals. Margaret accidentally makes a promise to help and the two hop straight to it. The two then go on 3 different trips. First they go to the main office of Ricky's and find that he probably has all of Julie's art at his home. So then next, they just go on and break into Ricky's apartment and steal her art back. They then find evidence that Ricky has stolen art from lots of other small artists and use them to get money. And their final plan to shut all of this down is to just spread the evidence and videos of him showing that he stole all this artist's work at a rich people party. I believe everything in the story is good up until the ending of the final heist. The final heist goes pretty well of the spreading information of Ricky's misdeeds and then almost getting caught by security. But then there's the issue. Almost. The way they get away from security and wrap up all of the storyline is just mind-blowing. It's wild. It snaps you out of the world with how, oh, well, they're here now, happily ever after, type of thing. So, what happens is when Julie and Margaret get cornered in some random janitor's closet, Margaret just suddenly gains super mouse strength and just rips the bars off of her wall so the two can squeeze out of the new hole in the wall and escape. Then after that, they start running and then find Portia and Sylvia out in the alleyway. Portia just now realizing who they are this whole time. Felix Banks, surprise, surprise, the owner of the bookstore everyone worked at. Everyone sees each other and Margaret just throws tea at Sylvia and Felix and says, drink up, and now they're following along now, climbing up the building with them. And then on top of the building, there's Felix's army of pet cats. Oh yeah, Felix is a cat nut, by the way. And they have to take all the cats with them now, and the cat says there's people dressing as animals nearby, so Julie figures out there's a furry convention. They all go there and hide out from security, and then boom, happily ever after. Whew. Some of the stuff is cool, but all at once, it just feels wildly fantastical and takes you really out and away from the game. Other than the ending, the story is surprisingly solid. It has a simple story with a fantastical idea overall and just runs with it. The simple story between two college friends is interesting and relatable. The story is very funny and has a lot of those laugh out loud moments. The only issues I had is when it rushes into the story and gets too outlandish with its storytelling. Now on to the next spot. The top 2 spot goes to Felicia Banks. I wanted so badly in my heart to have the funny trans cat up at the top of the list, but I just generally have more fun with Julie, and the storyline there feels more complete. The good stuff in the story really shines, and there isn't really too much bad about the timeline in my opinion. Let's start with a rehash of what the story is so you can see what this story is truly about. This story is just plain silly. It starts with just a misunderstanding of the two accidentally switching thermoses and Margaret having to run and chase down her boss Felix Banks. She also just cannot call him because that dumb twink left his phone at the work too. So she finds him on his way to the mall, and the two coincidentally are heading in the same direction after doing the trade of thermoses. Felix tells Margaret he has a keen eye for women's fashion, foreshadowing, and the two work together to get Margaret some drip. While Margaret is trying on clothes, it starts to slip that the mice whiskers and ears she has truly aren't fake, and Felix starts having a heart attack! Just kidding, he's growing a pair of, what do you call them in the industry? Mommy milkers. And Felix starts to change into a woman for seemingly no reason. Margaret then scrambles for clothes and the two exit out of the store together. The two then have a nice heart-to-heart about the sudden change of genders and the difference between the two genders. As the two figure their way out of the mall, Felix, or well, Felicia now, tries to do the Scooby-Doo thing of splitting up and searching for clues, gang. However, our G, Margaret, does not let Felicia struggle getting home and goes with them to their crib. Margaret then finds out Felicia is mentally insane and has 100 cats sitting within his household. The cat army then proceeds to violently and aggressively attack Margaret. The two then pop open Looky Loo, which is the worst name for a dollar store search engine ever, and do some Google searches trying to figure out what has happened to them and why Felicia is now turning into a cat and can now understand the entire cat army that she has within her home. The research leads to nowhere, but the two start to bond and Margaret crashes in Felicia's bed. The next morning, the two wake up and have a nice cup of tea. The two then realize they've been drugged! The revelation that it was a tea that did this to them happens here, and it happens rather smoothly and naturally. More fun character beats happen as the two go to work at the bookstore. Then after the quick shift at the bookshop, they then go to where the Margaret got the tea. Tea friends! As soon as Gavin finds out what the tea did to them, he looks like he just doo-doo farted himself. He has the most terrified face ever, especially when he realizes Felicia is a cat girl. Gavin tries his best to help them and even becomes a test subject, but nothing happens until the next day, when you find Gavin has grown a pair of knockers too. Soon, the furry convention comes into town, and Felicia starts to quickly grab everyone's attention. Her accidentally letting it slip that she has cat ears, and everyone being impressed by the technology of her ears. Here is where my main gripes lie with the story. The sudden inclusion of the furry convention in town and the main ending requiring the random furry stuff to be in here too is like meh to me. I understand if you like it, but to me it just doesn't sit very well and feels like it suddenly shakes up the vibe of the whole story. Instead of it being more of a story of gender identity and figuring out who you are, it is about capitalizing on the furries out there, which is a neat idea in a vacuum. However, it feels out of nowhere and just like a sudden instinct that they have to do this, instead of slowly built up by someone like Julie. The story then continues on for Felix and Margaret to capitalize off of this tea and make it a silly business model. All of the gang then get together in this new cafe bookstore and have a good life there. The end! In conclusion, Felicia Banks' storyline is solid. There are some holes every now and again in the story, but the story is generally clean. It's a nice story about gender identity and finding yourself, along with a lot, and I mean a lot, of cat shenanigans. I didn't like the sudden inclusion of the furry convention, and Felix was a bit of a piss baby sometimes, but the story was overall neato. This may or may not be a surprise to you, but the number 3rd spot, second worst in the game, is Sylvia Drake's storyline. First, let's get the good stuff out of the way. The story has a lot of promise and interesting ideas at play. The idea of complete opposites of each other attracting and getting through things is pretty cool. The opposites being a quiet book nerd and the sassy, ditzy, talkative blonde chick. The main overall concept of the story too, of not being sure of yourself and not liking who you may be too, is done rather well. I think in specific terms, it is called imposter syndrome. I like the silly snake gags, and the multiple personality stuff is pretty bug. I like the two of them finding their grounds as people and working together with the hypnotism. Also generally like the beginning of the two suspecting each other and being more hostile towards each other. It's also pretty interesting the moral implications tossed around with hypnotism. However, this brings me to a lot of the negatives the story has. The story, overall, in a nutshell, is just boring. In my opinion, at least. I think this is mainly due to most of the problems in the story being solved rather early, which leaves the rest of the story to feel tensionless and goalless. Just one hypno session and all of the troubling things inside of you, gone. These hypnotism sessions do lead Margaret and Sylvia closer to each other, and it's nice and sweet, but it just feels like immediately to our happy couple, and there aren't many problems between them. This can be fine if there are other problems within the story to go against them and keep things interesting. However, there really isn't much else stopping them or causing them problems, which leads the story to be empty and feel more or less like filler at times. They have to at least have some big main goal, right? Not really. The two are more or less all over the place. There isn't a goal of just figuring out how to turn back to normal like some of the other main plotlines, since they decipher that early. There isn't some main goal of trying to understand and work with each other as a couple. The only main thing that holds this story up is the imposter syndrome that Margaret deals with. It's interesting and relatable, the feelings of not feeling like yourself and trying to figure out these emotions. It is really cool how it is brought to thematic light with the visualization. No! With the visualization. God, no, don't do this to me. Visualization. With the visualization of another persona inside of Margaret and her arguing with the new persona of Peggy in her head. The thing is though, there's a catch-22. The plot is more meandering and doesn't focus on this too much, snapping between the multiple personality disorder going on and Sylvia's new goal to suddenly help everyone in the world with hypnotism, and Snake Gex and so on. Oh yeah, she is suddenly trans too, but it's dropped and it doesn't go much of anywhere besides a joke that no one paid much attention to it. All in all, Sylvia's storyline is not the most entertaining to me and hits its best moments early. It has decent moments sprinkled throughout and a nice overarching idea. With this though comes the bad of the story not feeling too focused. The story can be very meandering and doesn't have any main problems in Margaret's and Sylvia's way. The two don't even really have a main goal to hit for the entire story. This is why I say Sylvia's storyline is just above the last place at third. Fourth place. Where do I even start? Gavin. Oh, Gavin, my boy. The first storyline I was introduced to, and I was not a fan of it at all. I only like the main character beats of Margaret and the struggles she has to go through of being a literal 1 foot tall mouse. There were some nice moments laid throughout the story, like how Julie was actually about to friggin' murder Gavin for slighting Margaret, and how Gavin just literally pieces out on Margaret when seeing her suddenly as a small mouse. I mainly just bought the friendship between the two very well, but the relationship itself felt very, very forced. I guess let's start with what the storyline is. The storyline choices start immediately with being a drunk Dumbo and putting too much tea packets in your tea kettle, and almost ODing on dang tea. Tea time with friends? More like tea time with methamphetamine, god dang. Margaret quickly shrinks down to the size of an actual mouse, but still has some anthropomorphic qualities. Before she can grasp a hold of what just happened, Gavin suddenly starts calling her to double check that she made it home alright and didn't pass out on the street drunk. Margaret answers the phone, and her crazed rants about her suddenly being a mouse makes him start thinking, ah crud, maybe she did actually OD on tea and someone laced her stuff. He rushes over there to go help his friend during a presumed shroom trip and finds his special surprise waiting for him. Ta-da! I've turned your friend into a 1 foot tall mouse. This sudden magic trick makes this young man poo himself, and he goes running for the hills, unequipped for the sudden horror that is Mousegret. Yeah, he does come back to the house soon because of the guilt, but him just bolting is hilarious. After he comes back, the two sit down and have a chat about what to do. I.e., Margaret just berates Gavin and is assertive for once in her life instead of being a quiet book nerd. They soon just plan to have Margaret go with Gavin to his place, and he just babysits her for a while he tries to research the tea that turned her into a mouse. Margaret then soon just jumps in Gavin's bag and the two adventure off to his place. The next day, Margaret realizes that she probably is turning animalistic, judging by how she just murdered the cloth she was just sleeping on subconsciously. Those thoughts, though, are shoved aside as our man Gavin comes in, and the two yap about what to do next. Gavin is then sent off to go get Margaret some food and clothes after he gets off work. Meanwhile, Margaret then just does tiny mouse shenanigans for a while. These parts of the story where it is just Margaret struggling to survive and finding herself as a person is the story at its best. It was fun thinking like, wow, what would I do if I was turned into a literal 3 centimeter tall anthropomorphic mouse? How could I survive? And relating to Margaret in a crazy manner of what would you do if you lost your humanity. Back to the story. Eventually, Gavin comes back with some doll clothing that is somehow mouse sized for her, along with a doll bed for her to rest in. So now finally Margaret can stop running around in only a napkin. They continue trying to find any information on the tea, but still end up with no leads. So Margaret just goes to rest in her bed and Gavin crashes on the couch. This minor loop of waking up, Gavin goes to work, comes home from work with nothing, continues for a while, being spiced up sometimes with the occasional mental breakdown, Margaret going to work with Gavin for a while, a tea bath, big friggin' strawberry, and other mouse antics. The story is pretty good up until it starts dropping hints that the two characters may like each other. This feels like it comes out of nowhere and has little to no build-up besides maybe Margaret commanding Gavin sometimes. It then really leaves a sour taste in my mouth by making them become a couple too, which I'll really let you know my feelings about in a bit. Anywho, the loop is broken when Julie gets involved and deciphers the Japanese language on the box of tea for them, figuring out that she has to meditate to turn back. But because she drank too much tea, the process is going to be harder. Margaret drank so much tea and allowed herself to become animalistic. So now the meditation sequence to turn back is only going to turn her back slowly instead of all the way. So it will take her months to years to get back to normal size and back to her normal human form. So then the game just fast forwards through time until you suddenly get her back at her normal height. They also show the marriage of Gavin and Margaret too, and it all ends happily ever after. Lord Almighty. I have some things to say about this story. First, let's talk about the biggest poo stain in the classroom. The relationship stuff. The sudden relationship that is put on top of Gavin just assassinated his character. Full-blown JFK right then and there. Mainly due to the fact that he isn't that cool side character anymore, with the occasional one-liners and grounding plot in reality. He's the main focus now, and the relationship with a 5 centimeter mouse and Gavin himself doesn't feel real at all. The feelings for each other within the characters feel fake and artificial, which isn't good when the rest of the story relies on the idea of, oh yeah, they're a couple now. Like even when there's a dramatic moment when Gavin experiments with the T2 and becomes a bird, which then leads to Margaret to discover the pornography on his phone, making Margaret run away and break up with him doesn't even feel right, which deflates the attempts at tension between the couple. In addition to the relationship being bad, the ending is just too silly for my taste. It makes sense that there are no other alternatives, so they have to wait for time to pass by with the meditation, but I feel like this could have been done better. One last thing before we get to the only saving graces. The whole story being centered on just one main location and two people really bogged the story down as well, since there are a lot of possibilities of what you could do with the new Stuart Little of the town of Greenshire. They do slightly cover their bases in the end, with her now coming out to everyone in the town as a 4 centimeter mouse. However, it's brief and not much else is done with the idea of a talking mouse in a society or among her friends. Now, the sicktastical parts of the story. Literally just Margaret. She gets decent development to slightly push her away from being just the stand-in for the reader, and it is cool seeing someone have to adjust their life in an unorthodox way like this. Gavin and Margaret bounce off each other pretty well too, before the friendship turns sensual. Their friendship is way more viable than their relationship, and they work well as pals. Gavin's tall, down-to-earth, kind-hearted, and slightly oblivious nature works well with Margaret's quiet book nerd nature. So to put everything that I just said in the past 7 minutes together, they did my brother Gavin dirty by killing the good of his character, and Margaret is pretty pogger champ in the story. Hashtag justice for Gavin, as they say in the Twitter industry. Now that is all there is for today. OSTea is a surprisingly well-written naughty game, which is a rarity in its field. The storylines in my mind get ranked as Julie's first and best, Felix's second, Sylvia's third, and hashtag justice for Gavin last. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below, and I'll ignore them. If you like this video, then sub to get more content like this in the future. Thank you for tuning in, and make sure to always keep your head up and have a good day.